On a previous video, commenter AP pointed out that on the very excellent Commonwealth Realm channel a year or so ago, there was a curious observation that Nintendo had never had a console revealed and released in the same fiscal year. It's an interesting insight that I thought I would like to talk a little bit about. First of all, there are very logical reasons why this has taken place historically. Most Nintendo consoles until recently have had very long lead times. Even as recently as the Switch, the fact that the company was working on a new NX console was no secret since about 2014. The 3DS was pre-announced the year before it released, and other consoles have had similarly long lead times. This probably made sense in a different media landscape where Nintendo relied on tentpole events such as E3 to make their pitches to gaming journalists and therefore to fans. However, the advent of innovations such as the Nintendo Directs, allowing the company to speak freely to its audience, and the greater success of the Switch, meaning that Nintendo, frankly, isn't as desperate, has meant that longer lead times for new consoles is no longer a necessity. And indeed, for Switch revisions, we've seen very quick turnarounds with the Switch Lite and the Switch OLED released mid-year. It could just be happenstance that the way the Switch 2 launch fell, they would announce it right before the end of a fiscal year. But is there actually anything to this besides coincidence? Nintendo is a corporation and is expected to follow particular regulations, as you might expect. Under the Japanese Companies Act, corporations are required to meet certain criteria. The Association of Corporate Counsel gives an overview of some of these, noting listed companies have periodic reporting requirements and must submit annual and quarterly securities reports to the authorities. These companies must file without delay extraordinary reports on the occurrence of certain actions or events. Listed companies must promptly disclose certain material events and must disclose summary reports on financial results on a quarterly basis. Now, the question is, what qualifies as a material event? Well, obviously, as with all legal terms, these would be adjudicated by the courts, but there are some additional guidelines which relate chiefly to laws around insider trading and ensuring that material changes to business performance are identified in advance. We can see this on Nintendo's website, which keeps a running record of updates to their investor relations section. Much of this is just a notification of the uploading of financial and regulatory documentation, but every now and then they include a news release, such as the notification in September 2024 that Nintendo were filing a lawsuit against Pocket Pair over Palworld, or the information on the 20th of August 2024 that the Nintendo Museum would open its doors in a few weeks' time on the 2nd of October. It is arguable as to how critical these were to Nintendo's business, but clearly these are examples of decisions that are potentially market sensitive in a way that could affect people's judgments about the prospects of the company in such a way that might affect decisions to buy, sell, or hold stock in Nintendo. Of course, the arrival of such a console might be another such event. Indeed, it would almost have to be. But just because Nintendo has a reporting duty to its shareholders doesn't necessarily mean that this is bound by a particular time frame. After all, they gave just 6 weeks' notice of the opening of the Nintendo Museum. However, I think there is a case to be made that a new console for a business whose primary income stream for the last several decades has been video game hardware and software is a major move, and there is a requirement for an annual report, and this report has specific requirements within it. They must report anything which, I quote, is deemed to appropriately contain the matters which may have a material effect on investment decisions of investors, such as important matters concerning details of a stock and the financial condition and financial results of the corporate group and officers, major shareholders, and related companies, etc. There is reference further to ensuring information is disclosed in a matter that is timely and appropriate. Now, clearly, a major new console announcement would be relevant not just to Nintendo, but to the market as a whole, including their many collaborators, several of whom, such as Bandai Namco and Square Enix, Nintendo actually hold stock in. It will be very difficult, I think, to judge that Nintendo has made a timely and appropriate disclosure in their annual report if they left out a major new console reveal that they were planning to launch within a few months. Of course, it really does depend on the time frame, and all of this is a little ambiguous and would only really become an issue if the investors felt blindsided by Nintendo, but that is something that Nintendo will surely want to avoid at all costs. It seems prudent, therefore, that in an annual report preceding a year which will include a new system, not a revision but a generational leap system, they should give appropriate details to the shareholders. And as I say, this has never really mattered in the past because they've always had a good year to play with. But the Switch 2 announcement is obviously a different situation. Their first notification of the system's arrival took place in May 2024, the month before the annual report launched, and confirmed that information would be provided by the end of the year. This does give a year's build-up. By staggering the release across a financial year, they can be said to be playing fair with investors as to a major company change. Of course, this does have one complexity. The annual report doesn't shadow drop at the end of the Japanese fiscal year, which is the 31st of March. It is prepared and releases in June once the data for the financial quarter comes in and Nintendo can reflect on the year as a whole. And by mid-June, the next console will be most likely on shelves, or if not, definitely waiting in the wings. In other words, complete information prepared for the 2024 to 2025 fiscal year won't be available to shareholders until June. Now, I don't think this makes a difference to our considerations. They announced information about the console with the last annual report, in fact, before it, and while they didn't confirm a release was imminent in the 2025 to 26 fiscal year, I think any fair-minded person would make that assumption, given that the announcement was being made by the end of March 2025. Therefore, they can be said to have given 1 year's notice of the console alongside the annual reports, as well as making all reasonable efforts to keep investors updated through updates at key points in the year, while also maintaining secrecy to ensure they get their system off to the best possible launch in the marketplace. Still, I think from the point of view of forecasting future console changes, I think this point about investor disclosure timeframes is well worth considering, and I think it would be surprising if Nintendo announced such a major change as a new console in the future without having had at least one annual report written with awareness of this major future market change. Having said that, I don't have a background in law, still less Japanese law, and Nintendo are probably unlikely to have a major console for many years, so for now, this is just speculation. Thank you as ever for watching the channel. Please do like, comment, share, subscribe, and check out how to support the channel below. Take care, and I'll see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.